There are moments when music stops behaving like sound and starts behaving like presence. John Coltrane's music lives entirely in that space. It doesn't decorate silence, it challenges it. From a first note, there's a sense that something urgent is happening, something that cannot wait to be resolved politely. Coltrane's playing carries the weight of intention, as if each breath through the horn is an answer to a question that has not yet been fully spoken. Listening to Coltrane is not a passive experience. His music demands attention, patience, and vulnerability. It stretches time, refusing predictable shapes or comfortable resolutions. Notes do not simply arrive and leave. They linger, collide, and search. His sound feels less like melody and more like thought, less like performance and more like testimony. You don't just hear Coltrane, you witness him. What makes Coltrane singular is not only innovation, but sincerity. Every phase of his music reflects where he was emotionally, spiritually, and intellectually at that moment in his life. Nothing feels calculated. Nothing feels safe. His work reveals a man who believed that sound itself could carry meaning deeper than words, and who was willing to risk misunderstanding and pursue that belief fully. John William Coltrane was born in 1926 in Hamlet, North Carolina, a town where life followed predictable rhythms. Church on Sunday, work during the week, family at the center of everything. But for Coltrane, stability was interrupted early. Before he reached adulthood, he lost his father, his grandparents, and his uncle. Grief arrived quietly, then stayed. There were no instructions for how to process it. Silence filled the gaps. Music became the place where that silence could breathe. The saxophone entered Coltrane's life not as an ambition, but as a refuge. It offered him a voice when words failed. He practiced alone for long stretches, listening carefully not just to what he played, but to how it felt afterward. Even early on, Coltrane approached music with seriousness and humility. He wasn't chasing applause. He was chasing understanding. In those early years, Coltrane learned that sound could hold emotion without explanation. The horn allowed him to sit with feeling rather than escape it. This relationship with music, deep, private, and necessary, never left him. Long before fame or recognition, Coltrane had already decided what music would be in his life. Not decoration, not distraction, but survival. When Coltrane entered the professional jazz world, he stepped into an environment defined by intensity. Bebop demanded speed, precision, and deep harmonic knowledge. There was no room for uncertainty. Musicians were expected to know everything and prove it nightly. Coltrane responded not with arrogance, but with discipline. He practiced obsessively, dissecting harmony and rebuilding it from the inside out. Play with artists like Dizzy Gillespie introduced him to jazz as a living language, one spoken in real time under pressure. Later, joining Miles Davis placed Coltrane inside one of the most demanding musical environments imaginable. Miles expected growth, presence, and risk. Mistakes were not forgiven easily. Coltrane absorbed everything, often standing on stage unsure, but always listening. What set Coltrane apart was not immediate brilliance, but endurance. He was willing to struggle publicly. He was willing to sound unfinished. While others relied on style, Coltrane relied on work. He believed mastery was not something you reached. It was something you chased, and he chased it relentlessly. The same intensity that fueled Coltrane's growth also accelerated his collapse. The jazz world offered opportunity, but it also normalized excess. Long nights, constant travel, and relentless pressure made addiction feel ordinary. Heroin and alcohol crept into Coltrane's life slowly, then completely. What began as escape became dependence. His playing grew inconsistent. Focus slipped. Even as his ideas expanded, his execution faltered. The discipline that once defined him became harder to maintain. Coltrane knew he was losing control, but the momentum of the lifestyle carried him forward. The cost was not immediately visible, until it was. When Miles Davis finally fired him, it was not dramatic, but it was devastating. Coltrane lost more than a position in a famous band. He lost identity, structure, and direction. Without the stage, without the music community, he was left alone. What followed was isolation, sickness, and confrontation. Withdrawal was brutal, physically painful, emotionally exposed. There were no distractions left no audience to perform for, no reputation to protect. In that stripped-down state, Coltrane faced himself honestly. For the first time, change was no longer theoretical or optional. It was the only way forward. And in that moment, at his lowest point, the foundation for everything that followed was laid. When John Coltrane emerged from addiction in 1957, he did not describe the moment as triumph. There was no celebration, no sense of victory. Instead, there was clarity, quiet, fragile, and demanding. He spoke of a spiritual awakening not as a metaphor, but as an obligation. Life felt newly given, and therefore newly accountable. From that point on, every choice mattered. Discipline became the structure that held him together. Coltrane approached practice with almost monastic seriousness, often working for hours without pause. He did not practice to impress audiences or outpace peers. He practiced to remove distortion, technical, emotional, spiritual. He questioned every habit, every comfort, every shortcut he had previously relied on. Nothing was sacred unless it was true. Alongside this physical discipline, his intellectual and spiritual life expanded rapidly. Coltrane read deeply and broadly, studying Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, mysticism, and philosophy. He was not searching for conversion, but for connection. He believed truth revealed itself in patterns, and that sound might be one of the most direct ways to encounter it. Music, for Coltrane, became a form of prayer without words. This transformation was audible. His tone grew steadier, fuller, more intentional. Silence became as important as sound. The horn no longer felt like an extension of technique. It felt like an extension of breath, belief, and responsibility. Coltrane was no longer simply playing music. He was aligning himself with it. As Coltrane's discipline deepened, so did the intensity of his expression. By the late 1950s, his solos began to unfold in long, continuous streams of sound, dense, layered, and relentless. Critics would later call this approach sheets of sound, but the phrase barely captured the experience. These were not runs meant to dazzle. They were ideas released without filtration. Coltrane believed that withholding expression was a form of dishonesty. If a thought existed, it deserved to be voiced. This belief demanded extraordinary commitment. His breath control, finger strength, and mental focus were pushed to their limits. Every solo became a physical and spiritual test, one that required total presence. There was no room for detachment. To listeners accustomed to clean melodies and clear resolution, this music could feel overwhelming. But Coltrane was not interested in ease. He trusted that meaning could emerge through immersion. His playing invited listeners inside the process itself, into struggle, exploration, and persistence unfolding in real time. This period marked Coltrane's full rejection of restraint for its own sake. He was no longer concerned with how much was enough. He was concerned only with whether he was being honest. And honesty for him was expansive. By the early 1960s, Coltrane felt compelled to speak clearly. A Love Supreme, recorded in 1964, was that statement. Structured as a four-part suite, the album traced a spiritual arc: acknowledgement, struggle, resolve, and praise. It was not a concept imposed from the outside, but a journey drawn directly from his lived experience. What made A Love Supreme radical was not just its spiritual intent, but its openness. Coltrane did not hide behind abstraction. He included a poem with the album, explaining his purpose plainly. This was music offered as gratitude, as testimony, as devotion. There was no irony, no distance. When Coltrane chants the title phrase through his horn, the sound feels declarative, almost ceremonial. It is not asking to be admired. It is being offered. The album resonated far beyond jazz because it spoke a universal language: humility, struggle, and thankfulness expressed without defense. Yet A Love Supreme was not an ending. It was a foundation. Having spoken with clarity, Coltrane felt free to move even further outward, beyond form, beyond expectation, and into deeper uncertainty. After achieving what many considered artistic fulfillment, Coltrane chose risk over comfort. His later music dismantled familiar structures, traditional harmony, steady rhythm, predictable form. In their place came raw expression, cries, overtones, fractured melodies, and explosive energy. The music no longer sought balance. It sought truth. This shift unsettled many listeners. Critics questioned whether Coltrane had abandoned coherence altogether. Audiences walked out of performances. But Coltrane did not retreat. He believed that growth required dismantling what no longer served the search. Comfort, in his view, was the enemy of discovery. Each performance became an experiment conducted in public. There were no guarantees, no rehearsed outcomes. The music unfolded moment by moment, shaped by intuition and urgency. Coltrane trusted that sincerity mattered more than approval, and that risk was not recklessness. It was responsibility. In this phase, Coltrane accepted misunderstanding as the cost of honesty. He was no longer concerned with legacy. He was concerned with alignment between what he felt, what he believed, and what he played. In his final years, Coltrane's music felt untethered from time. Melody dissolved into pure expression. Rhythm stretched, collapsed, reformed. The performances felt less like concerts and more like rituals, collective attempts to reach something beyond language. There was an urgency in his playing, but not panic. It felt focused, deliberate, aware. Coltrane seemed to understand that time was limited, though he rarely spoke of it directly. Every note carried intention, as if it might be the last opportunity to say something essential. He surrounded himself with musicians who shared his hunger for exploration, people willing to step into uncertainty without fear. Together, they created music that challenged listeners not to understand, but to feel, to stay present inside complexity. When John Coltrane died in 1967 at the age of 40, he left behind work that feels unfinished only because the search itself was unfinished. His journey ended, but his questions remained open. And perhaps that openness, unresolved, honest, and alive, was always a destination. John Coltrane practiced with an intensity that bordered on obsession. Friends and neighbors recalled hearing scales pouring through apartment walls for hours at a time, sometimes late into the night. He approached practice not as repetition, but as investigation, testing fingerings, altering embouchure, dismantling familiar patterns. Coltrane believed that mastery was not something you arrived at, but something you maintained daily through humility and work. Despite the ferocity of his music, Coltrane was known personally as gentle, soft-spoken, and deeply polite. He avoided confrontation offstage and spoke thoughtfully, often choosing silence over certainty. Those close to him described a man who listened more than he spoke, who carried seriousness without arrogance. The contrast between his quiet demeanor and the intensity of his sound only deepened the mystery surrounding him. Coltrane had a lifelong fascination with spirituality across cultures. He studied Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Kabbalah, African spiritual traditions, and the writings of mystics and philosophers. He did not commit exclusively to any one doctrine. Instead, he believed truth revealed itself through many paths, and that music might be one of the most direct ways to approach it. His notebooks contain diagrams, scales, prayers, and philosophical questions written side by side. A Love Supreme has since been interpreted not just as an album, but as a spiritual text. It has been performed in churches, concert halls, and meditation spaces. Some listeners treat it as a form of ritual listening, returning to it during moments of transition, grief, or renewal. The poem included with the album has been analyzed line by line, studied as both testimony and theology. In Japan, John Coltrane achieved near-mythic status. Jazz clubs dedicated entirely to his recordings appeared, and musicians across genres studied his work with reverence. His influence extended far beyond jazz, into rock, experimental music, classical composition, and avant-garde performance. Artists who did not fully understand his theory still felt his intention. Coltrane believed music had the power to affect the human nervous system. He spoke about sound as something that could heal, awaken, or disturb, depending on how it was approached. This belief informed his later work, where he pushed sound to extremes, not to shock, but to reach emotional and spiritual thresholds words could not cross. Though his later music divided critics, Coltrane never expressed regret. He did not measure success by applause or sales, but by alignment, whether the music reflected his inner state honestly. He accepted misunderstanding as part of the cost of sincerity. Legacy was never his concern. Integrity was. Perhaps the most enduring truth about John Coltrane is this. Despite his complexity, Despite his intensity, he believed the ultimate purpose of music was love, not sentimentality, not comfort. John Coltrane never asked for admiration. He never sought comfort, applause, or easy understanding. What he offered instead was a challenge to listen fully, to feel deeply, and to confront the unanswered questions in our own lives. His music was not about arriving at truth. It was about the courage to seek it relentlessly, to push beyond fear, habit, and convention. Every note, every cascade of sound, every whisper of the horn carried the weight of a man who refused to settle for the superficial. He showed us that struggle could be sacred, that discipline could be devotional, and that imperfection was part of honesty. Coltrane did not write music to please or decorate. He wrote music to embody life itself, its grief, its longing, its joy, and its infinite complexity. Listening to him is not passive. It is participation in a search, a witness to a journey that never truly ends. In his work, we hear devotion to self, to sound, and to something larger than comprehension. When the last note fades, we are left not with silence, but with invitation. An invitation to continue searching, to breathe, to question, and to love fully. Coltrane's music reminds us that life is not about neat resolutions or tidy conclusions. It is about process, effort, and presence. And perhaps the greatest lesson he leaves behind is this: that to live honestly, to play fully, to create without compromise, is to touch something eternal. John Coltrane's legacy is not measured in recordings or accolades. It is measured in courage, curiosity, and fidelity to truth. And when we listen carefully, when we let the sound enter and settle within us, we hear more than music. We hear a life lived with intention, a soul unafraid to reach, and a love that continues to resonate beyond time.